In the Persian Gulf, framing is a weapon, not in the metaphorical sense that communications professionals use the word. The deliberate selection of language to shape perception, in the operational sense of framing established quickly enough with enough corroborating visual elements becomes the narrative that governs how every subsequent action is interpreted. The audience for a gray zone confrontation in the Strait of Hormuz is not two bridge crews. It is the international media, the diplomatic corps of 24 nations, the legal bodies whose assessments will shape precedent, and the domestic audiences of both sides who will be told what happened by whoever gets to the microphone first. The IRGCN understood this with the practical sophistication of an organization that had been operating in the Persian Gulf's political environment for decades. The framing did not need to be true to be effective. It needed to be stated first, stated clearly, and supported by physical elements that a camera could capture and that any viewer without operational context would interpret as consistent with the stated narrative. The narrative the IRGCN had constructed for this operation was specific. A U.S. Navy destroyer had been conducting an aggressive intercept maneuver against a legitimate Iranian commercial tanker in international waters. Iranian Coast Guard vessels had arrived to protect Iranian commercial interests from American harassment. The confrontation was American aggression. The Iranian vessels were a defensive response. None of this was true. The destroyer had been on a standard transit track through the southern Hormuz approach for 2 hours before the first IRGCN vessel appeared. The quote, _0__, whose transit it was allegedly intercepting was a vessel that had not been within 8 nautical miles of the destroyer's track at any point in the preceding 3 hours. The narrative was fabricated, but at 8:17 a.m. in the Strait of Hormuz, with 3 IRGCN vessels in position around the destroyer and the tanker making its northbound passage 8 nautical miles to the northeast, the physical elements of the picture were close enough to what the narrative described that a camera frame, excluding the 8 nautical mile distance and the track history, would produce imagery that supported the claim. The operation had been designed around the gap between what was happening and what could be made to appear to be happening. At 7:51 a.m., the first IRGCN contact appeared on the destroyer's surface search radar at bearing 025 degrees, range 11.4 nautical miles, speed 22 knots, AIS dark. A Moudge-class frigate. The IRGCN's heavier assets, 1,500 tons, armed, and with a media capability that included a dedicated communications team and a broadcast uplink system that could transmit footage to Iranian state media within minutes of capture. The Moudge was not a fast attack craft. It was a platform designed to project presence and authority rather than speed, and its approach at 22 knots from the north was not the approach geometry of a vessel trying to catch something. It was the approach geometry of a vessel that already knew where something would be and was arriving to establish a position around it. At 7:58 a.m., the second contact appeared at bearing 158 degrees, range 9.8 nautical miles. A Peykaap-class fast attack craft, fast, camera-equipped, the standard IRGCN documentation platform, speed 31 knots, course 305 degrees, approaching from the southeast on a track that would place it on the destroyer's starboard quarter. At 8:04 a.m., the third contact, bearing 290 degrees, range 8.1 nautical miles. A second Peykaap, speed 28 knots, approaching from the northwest. 3 contacts, 3 bearings. The geometry was deliberate. North, southeast, and northwest, a triangle that would close around the destroyer's current position in approximately 12 minutes, with the Moudge arriving from the north as the senior vessel establishing the legal framing, and the 2 Peykaps arriving from the flanks as the camera platforms that would document whatever happened next. CPA, Moudge, CPA, 1,200 yards, north, approximately 11 minutes. CPA, Southeast Peykaap, CPA, 800 yards, starboard quarter, 8 minutes. CPA, Northwest Peykaap, CPA, 950 yards, port bow, 9 minutes. 3 CPAs inside 1,200 yards, converging in an 8 to 11 minute window. The geometry of the arrival was designed to produce simultaneous closest approaches, all 3 vessels reaching their minimum separation points within a 3-minute window, creating a moment of maximum visual compression around the U.S. ship that would appear in footage from any of the 3 platforms as an American destroyer surrounded by Iranian naval assets. At 8:07 a.m., Channel 16 activated. The voice was in Farsi first, then English, calm and formal. American warship, American warship. This is Islamic Republic of Iran Navy vessel. You are conducting hostile intercept operations against Iranian commercial shipping in violation of international maritime law. You are ordered to cease your intercept immediately and withdraw from the transit corridor. Iranian naval vessels are responding to protect Iranian commercial interests. You are surrounded. Cease your illegal activity. Surrounded. The word was specific. The transmission was designed to create the record. A radio call stating that the U.S. destroyer was conducting an illegal intercept, that Iranian vessels were responding, that the U.S. ship was surrounded. Every vessel within radio range in the Strait of Hormuz heard it. The international maritime communication infrastructure that relayed Channel 16 traffic to Coast Guard authorities, port services, and maritime monitoring organizations had captured it. The record existed before any camera was in position to capture visual confirmation. The captain heard the transmission. He had been on the bridge since 7:45 a.m., 6 minutes before the first contact appeared. He had reviewed the morning's intelligence summary. He had noted the Iranian tanker at 8 nautical miles northeast, moving northbound at 11 knots on a track that never intersected the destroyer's own course at any point in the preceding 3 hours, and was not projected to intersect it at any point in the next 2 hours. He looked at the communication officer. Log it, full text, timestamp, channel. No response. He did not say anything further about the transmission. There was nothing to say. The transmission was not a communication. It was the first element of a legal record, and responding to it in any terms, accepting any element of its framing, or attempting to rebut any element of it, would add the destroyer's voice to that record in ways that could be edited and excerpted. Silence was the correct legal position. The log documentation was the correct evidentiary response. At 8:09 a.m., the Iranian tanker, which had been at 8 nautical miles northeast and moving northbound on its independent track, activated its AIS transponder's distress mode. Not an EPIRB, not a formal mayday on Channel 16. The AIS distress flag, a software parameter within the automatic identification system's transmission that indicated a vessel was in distress and required assistance, transmitted a single flag activation on the standard AIS network that every vessel and shore station monitoring the strait received simultaneously. The tanker's AIS continued to show a vessel making 11 knots on a northbound heading, with no change in course, no reduction in speed, and no observable behavior consistent with a vessel in distress. But the AIS distress flag was active. An AIS distress flag on a vessel 8 nautical miles northeast of the destroyer's position created a legal complication that the EPIRB incident had previously established was the IRGCN's preferred instrument for controlling U.S. ship behavior through international maritime law. A vessel in distress that was 8 miles away and moving at 11 knots was not a vessel the destroyer was obligated to immediately approach. The separation and the vessel's own apparent underway condition complicated the SOLAS analysis in ways the fake distress encounter had made familiar. But the AIS distress flag created a record that Iran's narrative could use. The commercial tanker had activated its distress system while the American destroyer was in the vicinity. The causal relationship between the two facts, that the tanker's distress flag and the destroyer's presence occurred simultaneously, was not established by the AIS data. It would be asserted by the IRGCN's media operations within the hour. The CIC noted the AIS distress flag at 8:09 a.m. The captain noted it. He assessed it against the tanker's actual behavior, 11 knots, northbound, no visible change in course or speed on the radar, and made the determination that was available to him. A vessel moving at 11 knots on a steady course in the Strait of Hormuz was not exhibiting behavior consistent with a vessel in genuine distress, and the AIS distress flag activation did not change that assessment. Log the AIS distress activation, timestamp, and position of the tanker. Note that the tanker's speed and course show no change consistent with actual distress. Continue monitoring. The first friction arrived at 8:11 a.m. from the political layer of the U.S. command chain. Fifth Fleet's Operations Center in Bahrain had been monitoring since 8:04 a.m. when the three-contact triangle had become visible on satellite feeds. At 8:11 a.m., an encrypted priority message arrived that the captain had been expecting. Fifth Fleet was aware of the AIS distress flag activation and the Channel 16 broadcast. Fifth Fleet legal staff was assessing whether the combination of vessel with an active AIS distress flag and a Channel 16 claim of American intercept operations created a situation in which the destroyer's commanding officer was required to formally respond to the distress flag through maritime law channels, which would involve transmitting on Channel 16 to acknowledge the distress and state the destroyer's response intentions. A Channel 16 transmission from the destroyer in any form responding to any aspect of the situation would be captured by every monitoring platform in the strait and would be used as the beginning of a dialogue that the IRGCN's media operations would edit and present as evidence that the U.S. ship had acknowledged the Iranian framing. Fifth Fleet was requesting the commanding officer's assessment of whether the SOLAS response obligation could be managed through non-broadcast means. Specifically, through direct encrypted communication to Fifth Fleet's Maritime Rescue Coordination Liaison rather than through Channel 16. The captain's response took 30 seconds to draft. The AIS distress flag is assessed as tactical, not genuine. The tanker is making 11 knots on steady course with no observable behavior change. SOLAS response obligation does not extend to a vessel exhibiting no distress behavior. Formal Channel 16 response would contribute to the IRGCN's narrative record, assessing through encrypted channels only. Will transmit formal non-distress determination at 0820 if vessel continues to show no distress behavior. The message transmitted. The Channel 16 remained silent on the destroyer's end. Quote, 10, quote, 11. The triangle was closing. At 8:13 a.m., the Seahawk launched, not as the first escalation response, as the documentation platform. The helicopter climbed to 800 feet and established a track that gave it overhead coverage of all three approaching IRGCN contacts and the tanker at 8 nautical miles northeast simultaneously. Its FLIR began documenting the Moudge from the north, its course, its speed, its configuration, the two Peykaps from their respective bearings, the tanker making 11 knots on a northbound heading with no observable distress behavior, the destroyer on its transit track, the geometry of all five vessels in the context of the Strait's geography. The documentation was the response. The IRGCN operation was built on framing. The destroyer's response was a superior frame. The actual picture recorded by a U.S. military asset showing what was actually happening and what was not. The tanker at 11 knots. The destroyer on its transit track. The IRGCN vessels on an intercept approach that had originated long before they arrived in the vicinity of anything that could be described as an American intercept operation. The second friction arrived at 8:15 a.m. from the physical environment. The Strait of Hormuz at 8:15 a.m. in late November carried a surface visibility of approximately 6 nautical miles, below the 9 nautical mile visibility of clearer days, but sufficient for optical identification of vessels at 1,000 yards. At 8 nautical miles, the tanker was at the limit of the Strait's current optical visibility. A camera positioned on any of the IRGCN vessels at 1,000 yards from the destroyer could not capture both the destroyer and the tanker in the same frame. The tanker was beyond optical range. The footage from the IRGCN's camera platforms would show the destroyer. It would not show the 8 nautical miles separation between the destroyer and the tanker. The Seahawk at 800 feet had a different visual geometry. At 800 feet altitude, with the superior optical range that elevated altitude provided, the Seahawk's camera could capture both the destroyer and the tanker in the same wide-angle frame, not with high magnification detail on either, but as identifiable vessels at their respective positions, with the navigable water between them, establishing the spatial relationship that the IRGCN's ground-level cameras could not show. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore 12, underscore, underscore. The Seahawk's camera captured the frame at 8:16 a.m., the destroyer on its transit track, the tanker 8 nautical miles northeast at 11 knots, the Moudge approaching from the north, the two Peykaps converging from southeast and northwest, a single frame showing the geometry of what was actually happening, not the IRGCN's claim of an American intercept, but the actual spatial relationships in the Strait at 8:16 a.m. The image was timestamped, encrypted, and transmitted to Fifth Fleet at 8:17 a.m. At 8:17 a.m., Channel 16 activated again. The Moudge's transmission, this time in English only. American warship, you are now surrounded by Islamic Republic of Iran Navy vessels responding to your illegal intercept operation. Do not attempt to maneuver. Iranian Coast Guard Authority is now in effect in this area. Cooperate with Iranian Maritime Administration. Iranian Coast Guard Authority. Cooperate. The Moudge's commanding officer was escalating the verbal framing as the triangle tightened physically. The two elements of the operation coordinated to arrive simultaneously. The verbal assertion of authority supported by the visual of three IRGCN vessels at close range. The captain's response to the second transmission was identical to his response to the first. Log it. No response. The triangle achieved its minimum geometry at 8:19 a.m. Moudge at 1,100 yards, bearing 005 degrees. Southeast Peykaap at 820 yards, bearing 148 degrees. Northwest Peykaap at 890 yards, bearing 282 degrees. The destroyer inside a 1,100-yard maximum triangle. All three IRGCN vessels at matching speed, holding their positions. Camera platforms on both Peykaps recording. Broadcast team on the Moudge transmitting live footage to an uplink that was feeding Iranian state media. The footage existed. It showed a U.S. destroyer with three Iranian naval vessels at 800 to 1,100 yards, one of which was broadcasting claims of illegal intercept on Channel 16. Without the context, without the track history, without the 8 nautical mile tanker separation, without the Seahawk's wide-angle documentation, the footage supported the narrative the IRGCN had constructed. With the context, it showed three Iranian naval vessels that had approached a U.S. destroyer on its normal transit track, established a close-range triangle around it, and broadcast unsupported claims of illegal activity, while a tanker that had no interaction with the destroyer continued its northbound transit 8 nautical miles away. The captain made his first active escalation at 8:21 a.m. Quote _15 _3C CIWS barrel rotations. One oriented toward the Moudge, one toward the southeast Peykaap, one toward the northwest Peykaap. The simultaneous 3-contact tracking was a signal that required no translation. Every contact in the geometry was being measured at the precision that mattered by all available tracking systems at the same moment. It was also a signal that produced a specific technical challenge for the IRGCN vessel's own defensive systems. A U.S. destroyer tracking 3 contacts simultaneously was a destroyer whose CIC was fully functional, fully staffed, and fully focused on the geometry around it. At 8:24 a.m., the fire control illumination radar activated on the Moudge. The Moudge was the formation's senior vessel, the platform carrying the broadcast team, the legal framing instrument. Illuminating it with fire control radar was a specific signal. The primary platform making the legal claims was the primary platform being measured by the U.S. ship's fire control architecture. The measurement was a message. We know your position, your course, and your speed at the precision required for the calculation that comes after measurement. The Moudge's Channel 16 broadcast paused for 11 seconds, then resumed. The same text, the same formal tone, the same claims. But the 11-second pause was in the audio record. The CIC logged it. At 8:27 a.m., the tanker deactivated its AIS distress flag. No explanation, no transmission on Channel 16. The distress flag was active, and then it was not active. The AIS returning to normal operating parameters on a vessel that had been making 11 knots on a steady northbound course for the entire duration of the flag's activation. The deactivation was logged. The log noted the duration of the activation, 18 minutes, and the fact that the tanker's course and speed had not changed at any point during those 18 minutes. At 8:29 a.m., the Northwest Peykaap speed readout changed. Not a course change, a speed reduction. From the 28 knots it had been maintaining at its 890-yard holding position to 24 knots, a 4-knot reduction that, over the next 90 seconds, would allow the destroyer's increasing rate of advance past the holding position to open the 890-yard separation slightly. 890 yards becoming 920, becoming 960, as the Northwest Peykaap fell marginally behind the geometry. The CPA counter updated. Northwest Peykaap CPA now 960 yards and opening. The triangle had a crack in its northwestern corner. The captain registered the speed reduction. He said nothing about it to anyone on the bridge. He waited. At 8:32 a.m., the Southeast Peykaap adjusted course by 4 degrees to starboard, not toward the destroyer, away from it. The CPA for the Southeast Peykaap revised 820 yards to 880 yards and opening. 2 of the 3 triangle vertices were opening. The Moudge, at 1,100 yards to the north, held its position, its broadcast team still transmitting, its Channel 16 still asserting Iranian maritime authority, its fire control radar now receiving the illumination from the destroyer that it had been receiving since 8:24 a.m. without any change in its behavior. At 8:35 a.m., the Seahawk descended from 800 feet to 300 feet and repositioned over the Moudge's position, its FLIR locked on the frigate's deck and bridge. The helicopter's presence at 300 feet above the Moudge was the same signal it had produced in every previous encounter. We are directly overhead. We are tracking you in detail. We know what your deck crew is doing and your bridge team is doing and your broadcast team is doing. At 8:37 a.m., the Moudge's speed increased by 3 knots. Not toward the destroyer. The Moudge turned to port, away from the triangle geometry. Its course changing from southbound to southwest. A maneuver that took the frigate's bow angle away from the destroyer and began the sequence of movement that would, over the next several minutes, take it out of the 1,100-yard position it had held for 18 minutes. Moudge, course change, bearing opening, CPA now 1,300 yards and increasing. All 3 vertices were opening. The triangle was dissolving, not with a dramatic withdrawal, not with any transmission acknowledging that the encounter was ending, but with the quiet geometry of 3 vessels whose courses were no longer maintaining the encirclement and whose separation distances from the destroyer were now measured in increasing rather than decreasing numbers. Channel 16 was silent. The Moudge had stopped broadcasting. The 18-minute period of claims and counterclaims existed in the maritime radio record as a one-sided assertion. The IRGCN's claims, unanswered by any response from the U.S. ship, followed by the physical withdrawal of the vessels making those claims from the positions that had given them visual weight. At 8:44 a.m., all three IRGCN contacts were at ranges exceeding 3 nautical miles, and their CPA counters were no longer relevant to any immediate tactical concern. The tanker continued north at 11 knots. At 8:44 a.m., it was 11 nautical miles from the destroyer's current position. The helmsman, who had held the westbound heading throughout the encounter, who had held course and speed from the first IRGCN contact at 7:51 a.m. through the triangle's minimum geometry, at 8:19 a.m. through the 3-vertex dissolution, completed his watch at 9 a.m., 69 minutes on course, 69 minutes during which 3 Iranian naval vessels had established a documented claim of illegal American intercept operations. An Iranian tanker had activated and deactivated an AIS distress flag, and 2 Peykaap camera platforms had captured footage that IRGCN media would spend the following hours distributing. The helmsman knew none of the subsequent media activity. He knew the compass heading and the sea state and the coffee that was cold on the navigation console and the specific quality of silence on the bridge that followed the dissolution of the triangle. A silence that was different from the silence before the contacts appeared deeper in some way. The silence of a crew that had absorbed something and was in the process of registering what the absorption had cost. He handed off the wheel without ceremony. He went below. He did not go to the mess. He went to his rack and sat on it for 4 minutes, then went to the mess and ate breakfast without discussing the watch with anyone who had not been on the bridge. At 9:15 a.m., the situation report reached 5th Fleet. 3 IRGCN vessels, 1 Moudge-class frigate, 2 Peykaap-class fast attack craft, established a 1,100-yard maximum triangle around the destroyer from 8:19 to approximately 8:37 a.m. Channel 16, claims of illegal intercept asserted twice, unanswered. AIS distress flag on Iranian tanker active from 8:09 to 8:27 a.m., assessed as tactical. Tanker course and speed unchanged throughout. Separation from destroyer approximately 8 nautical miles throughout. Seahawk deployed at 8:13 a.m. Wide-angle documentation frame captured at 8:16 a.m. Fire control illumination activated on Moudge at 8:24 a.m. All IRGCN contacts beyond 3 nautical miles by 8:44 a.m. Transit continuing on assigned track. 1 Moudge-class frigate, 2 Peykaap-class fast attack craft. 53 minutes from first contact appearance to all contacts beyond 3 nautical miles. 820 yards, minimum separation, southeast Peykaap. 18 minutes of Channel 16 framing broadcast. 0 destroyer transmissions on Channel 16. 1 Seahawk wide-angle documentation frame showing tanker separation. 0 course deviations. 0 speed changes from the standard transit. The framing operation required the U.S. ship to either accept the frame by responding on Channel 16 by altering course in response to the triangle, by acknowledging any element of the narrative being constructed around it, or to demonstrate by its behavior that the frame was fabricated. The demonstration did not require a response. It required a track history that said the same thing before the operation began, during it, and after it. Course held, speed held, tanker 8 miles away, no intercept ever occurring. The track history existed before the first IRGCN contact appeared, and after the last one withdrew. That was the entirety of the rebuttal. It was sufficient.